This true story will shock you. Listen to the end. A young girl named Johnny was born in 1983 in the small American town of Bristol, Tennessee. She was cheerful and outgoing, had many friends, and was always the life of the party. During her school years, Johnny was also part of the local cheerleading team. After high school, she enrolled at East Tennessee State University, where she studied psychology and criminology. While attending school, she also got a part-time job at a children's education center. During her studies, Johnny met a guy named Jason White, and they started dating. The couple got engaged in 2004 when Johnny was 21 years old. Soon, Johnny decided to pursue a master's degree in psychology, which required her to move to Knoxville to study at another university. She realized that she wanted to continue working in this field and become a child psychologist. Until she found her own place to live, Johnny stayed in the apartment of her friend Jason Imami, who studied with her at the university. Johnny took on 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the evening of Sunday, December 5th, Johnny finished her shift at the store and went to the mall to buy Christmas gifts. After returning home, she wrapped some of the presents and chatted with her roommate. She then went to her room, talked to her boyfriend on the phone, and went to bed. Around 4 a.m., Jason Imami woke up to the sound of a woman screaming. He thought Johnny might be having a nightmare. As he headed toward her room, he saw an unknown man holding a knife. Jason lunged at him and managed to land several punches. The intruder fought back, but at some point, Jason succeeded in pushing him away and ran out of the apartment. Jason immediately rushed to the nearby residential complex and began knocking on all the doors, hoping someone would call the police. But no one answered, so he ran to the nearest 24-hour store, where the clerk quickly dialed 911. Jason told them what had happened, and the police arrived at his home. Officers found Johnny lying on the hallway floor. She was alive, but barely responsive to what was happening around her. The police searched the entire building and surrounding area, but did not find the attacker. Johnny was quickly taken to the nearest hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they could not save her. Medical experts determined that she had sustained more than 20 stab wounds. Because of this, the doctors had virtually no chance of keeping her alive. As for her roommate, the attacker managed to inflict 8 wounds on him, but only one was serious. The medical team provided him with the necessary care, and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, detectives began examining the crime scene, following the blood trail in the hallway. They realized that Johnny had tried to reach out to the neighbors for help, but none of the 4 residents opened their doors. Near the door to Johnny's room, investigators found the murder weapon, a knife from Jason's kitchen. The attacker had struck with such force that the blade had bent. Additionally, police found blood traces near the back door of the apartment and on the staircase leading from the 2nd floor to the street. Since both Jason and Johnny had exited through the front door, detectives drew the most obvious conclusion. The killer had left the crime scene through the back door of Jason's room. They also found another clue, a partial boot print left by the perpetrator, possibly while he was following Jason and attacking him. Given the brutality with which the killer assaulted Johnny, police suspected this was a personal crime. Their first step was to take a closer look at Johnny's fiancée. Despite the fact that he was about 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville, all of Johnny's friends and relatives claimed that the couple had a great relationship, and there was no conceivable motive for the fiancé to commit such a heinous crime. The fiancé only learned about his fiancée's death at 10 a.m. when her mother called him. He said that after hearing the news, He fainted and couldn't come to his senses for a long time. He had to ask his neighbor to book him a plane ticket and pack his suitcase, as he was unable to do anything himself. Detectives thoroughly checked his alibi and concluded that it was physically impossible for him to travel to Knoxville and back by morning. As a result, he was excluded from the list of suspects. The investigators then shifted their focus to Johnny's neighbor. Unlike the victim's fiancé, he didn't have any alibi. Jason had been in the same apartment with her and could have committed the crime. Johnny's friends and relatives were also suspicious of him. Some believed that he was most likely the killer, while others blamed the fiancé for fleeing the apartment and leaving the girl alone. Because of this, the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. As soon as Jason was discharged from the hospital, detectives began interrogating him. He stuck to his initial story. He had woken up to screaming, saw an unknown man, and was then attacked. After managing to push the attacker away, Jason ran to the front door and escaped, trying to alert the neighbors. He thought Johnny had also left the apartment since he no longer heard her screams. However, the police were not quick to believe this account. The first thing that raised their suspicions about Jason was his injuries. 7 out of the 8 wounds were not life-threatening at all. One on his right arm could have been sustained either in self-defense or while attacking someone. Furthermore, forensic experts found no signs of forced entry into the apartment. This further pointed to someone who was already inside the apartment. Jason mentioned that he had taken out the trash through the back door that evening, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. The detectives kept pressing him, focusing on which door he had used to run outside. Jason insisted that he left through the front door, but the police suspected he was lying. If he had exited through the back door, it would explain the bloody footprints found near the door by the stairs, which would further suggest his guilt. Additionally, the police accused him of using and selling illegal substances and becoming aggressive when he couldn't get a fix. Jason denied all these accusations, but the investigators continued bombarding him with various charges. After several hours of interrogation at the police station, detectives suggested that Jason take a polygraph test. He agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked leading questions, and at the end of the session, the expert told Jason that he had failed the test. The machine indicated that he had given false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason nearly had a breakdown. He screamed that he had nothing to do with the crime and feared for his life, as the real perpetrator was still at large. However, the detectives didn't believe him. Still, they couldn't arrest him for murder, as there was no solid evidence against Jason. They had to wait for the lab experts to finish analyzing the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment. And here awaited an unexpected twist. On the knife used as the murder weapon, 3 DNA samples were found: the victim's, Jason's, and an unknown man's. This man's DNA was also discovered in Johnny's room, on the handle of the back door and on the stairs the perpetrator used to escape. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint on the knife's handle did not match Jason's. These findings caused the police to doubt whether Jason was truly the killer. The evidence confirmed that a third person was indeed present in the apartment that night. However, comparing the unknown man's DNA against available databases yielded no matches. Despite the detectives no longer considering Jason the murderer, the public still viewed him with suspicion. People blamed him for fleeing and abandoning his girlfriend instead of trying to protect her. On top of this, Jason began suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Soon, another intriguing fact came to light. It turned out that the polygraph operator had simply misinterpreted the device's readings. In reality, there were no signs that Jason had been lying. Moreover, the police had no real evidence that the young man was involved with illegal substances. They accused him of this merely to apply additional pressure. Most importantly, the police initially downplayed the severity of Jason's injuries. In reality, it turned out that he had suffered significant harm. The attacker had damaged his lung and neck to such an extent that full recovery seemed unlikely. Due to these misleading police reports, the insurance company covered only 25% of his medical expenses, leaving Jason in serious financial trouble. After he was no longer considered a suspect, the police began questioning him as a witness. Based on his description, they created a rough sketch of the attacker. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't been able to see the assailant's face clearly, as it was dark in the apartment, and the attack happened immediately after he stepped out of the room. The detectives also found something interesting in Johnny's room. They discovered a cap, and near the back stairs, there were scattered CDs and a stereo player. Initially, they thought these items belonged to the victim, or Jason. However, Jason denied this, stating that none of these items had been in his apartment before, suggesting that the killer had left them behind. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was broadcast in the news, the police received hundreds of potential leads. People called in to report anyone they knew who even remotely resembled the sketch, and detectives followed up on each of these tips. One of the leads seemed particularly interesting to the detectives. They were informed that a group of teenagers had been active in the area where Johnny's murder took place, breaking into homes with the intent to rob. One of them, a 19-year-old named Michael, resembled the sketch of the suspect, so the police began searching for him. This task wasn't easy, as Michael was already wanted for theft. However, now that he was a potential murder suspect, dozens of officers joined the search. Soon they managed to track him down and bring him in for questioning. Investigators immediately noticed his shoes. The pattern on the soles closely matched the footprint left by the killer. They took DNA samples and fingerprints from the young man and sent them to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, he was subjected to an interrogation, during which the detectives were met with an unexpected twist. Michael quickly confessed that he and a friend had indeed broken into Johnny's apartment that night. According to him, they intended to steal valuable items, but his friend grabbed a knife and attacked Johnny. However, the detectives were soon skeptical of his story. First, the details Michael provided did not align with the actual facts. Secondly, there was no evidence at the crime scene to suggest the presence of two outsiders. The lab results only confirmed the detectives' skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the crime scene. The same applied to his shoes. The sole pattern differed from the footprint in Jason's room. In the end, the police realized that the young man was simply lying. As strange as it may sound, this happens quite often. In many high-profile cases, there are people who falsely take the blame for someone else's crime. Some do it to attract attention, while others lie in hopes of receiving a reward for information. It's unclear what Michael's motives were, but his story turned out to be fabricated. Since then, investigators have interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and collected around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched. A reward for information leading to the case's resolution was announced in the first weeks of the investigation. As months passed, the reward grew, and by December 2005, a year after the murder, it reached $60,000. The state governor added $20,000 from his own pocket, which further drew public attention. Despite the large number of leads, all of them ended in dead ends, and the case stalled for several years. In 2007, the victims' parents sought changes to state legislation, as they were surprised that the killer's fingerprints and DNA were not found in any databases. Given the brutality with which he committed the crime, Johnny's parents refused to believe this was his first offense. Later, they learned that under Tennessee law, fingerprints and DNA samples were only taken from convicted criminals. Johnny's parents decided to change that. They helped create a new law that required these samples to be collected from anyone arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported the initiative, and in May 2007, the law was passed. 2 months later, there was finally a breakthrough in the case. Police arrested 22-year-old Tyler Olson for violating the terms of his parole. He had been convicted of theft, and during a search of his home, marijuana plants were found, leading to his rearrest. Olson had an extensive criminal record, mostly consisting of thefts, check fraud, and car thefts. He had been arrested numerous times, but his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected before. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, which did not stop him from regularly committing crimes. It turned out that Olson had already been on the investigators' radar 5 months earlier. They had received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder, but for some reason, the police did not attempt to collect his DNA for analysis. Now, with his arrest for parole violations, they decided to question him about Johnny's case. Olson denied any involvement in the murder, but voluntarily agreed to provide a DNA sample. The sample was handed over to experts, and soon the detectives received a report from the lab. Tyler's DNA fully matched the sample found in the victim's apartment. After this, the man's fingerprints were taken, and they also matched the print found on the murder weapon. Following this, Olson was arrested, and the detectives brought him in for questioning. At first, the man denied his guilt, but soon after, he decided to confess to what he had done. Tyler explained that on that night, he wanted to steal Johnny's car and entered the apartment through the back door to steal the keys. When he entered the girl's room, she woke up and started screaming. Olson then grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her several times. However, the man did not recall anyone else being in the apartment. He insisted that he didn't intend to kill anyone and that everything happened by accident. The detectives doubted the truthfulness of certain details. They leaned more towards the belief that Tyler had planned the murder from the start, possibly having stalked the victim for some time. One fact indirectly supported this theory. During the early stages of the investigation, Johnny's friends told the investigators that someone had been following the girl in a car. At the time, they were unable to find any evidence of this, but after Olson's arrest, they considered that he could have indeed been stalking her. Despite this, there was no doubt about the man's guilt. His DNA and fingerprints were on the murder weapon, and they could only have gotten there if he had been the one stabbing the victim. Olson's trial was scheduled to begin in mid-2008, and by that time the man had already hired a lawyer. It appeared that the lawyer advised him to retract his confession, and Tyler presented the detectives with a new version of the events. Now he claimed that he had broken into Johnny's apartment, along with his friend named Noah Cox. According to Olson, when he entered Johnny's room to take the car keys, she allegedly woke up, grabbed a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then ran out of the apartment through the back door, while his friend went into Johnny's room, where he supposedly wrestled the knife away from her and killed her. This story also didn't convince the police. No other fingerprints or DNA were found at the crime scene, so the involvement of anyone else seemed highly unlikely. The detectives were waiting for the trial to begin, but it was not meant to happen. On March 28, 2008, Tyler Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Several suicide notes were found beside him, addressed to his family, Johnny's relatives, and the police. In his letter to the detectives, he once again claimed that his friend was the real killer. However, he also offered apologies to Johnny's relatives and his own family. The detectives continued to believe that Olson was the one who committed the murder. Nevertheless, they repeatedly interrogated his alleged friend, but no evidence linking him to the crime was ever found. Johnny's parents also believed that Olson had lied. In their view, if Tyler were truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed far more likely that he simply didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Moreover, for several months after his initial confession, Olson consistently stated that he had entered the apartment alone and no one else was with him. If he had been trying to cover for his friend all along, why did he suddenly retract his confession and start accusing him of the murder?